Education, page 33 and 34, the men who held fast God's principles of life dwelt among the fields and hills. They were tillers of the soil and keepers of flocks and herds, and in this free, independent life with its opportunities for labor and study and meditation, they learned of God and taught their children of his works and ways. This was the method of education that God desired to establish in Israel. So from this whole week lesson study, we will learn more about how the Lord directed the people of Israel and educated them. So for whole week, we have 5 subtopics. The first one is the patriarchs. The second is education in the wilderness. Third is God's plan for Israel. Fourth is school of prophets. And number 5, noble example. So let's go on to our first subtopic. It's entitled the patriarchs. Okay. The first question we have is, describe Abram's example as a patriarch. Genesis 18, verse 17 to 19, and Genesis 12, verse 6 to 8. Can we read it, Sister Susanna, please?
Genesis 18, 17 to 19. And the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham that thing which I do, seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him? For I know him, that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord to do justice and judgment, that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he has spoken of him.
Okay, thank you. So describe Abram's example as a patriarch. So Abraham started his own legacy of government in his household. He trained thousands of souls and trained the heads of the household of the family in order for them to be ready to transmit the knowledge of the truth to the world. He makes sure that everyone is far from the temptations of the world. He commands his household to keep the way of the Lord. He cultivated the religion, and he makes sure that everyone is treated fairly. So he has the rule in the household. And that is Abraham's example of how he ruled his household. And it says here in our note, in early times, the father was the ruler and the priest of his own family, and he exercised authority over his children, even after they had families of their own. So even though they have already children, they still, if they're still under the roof of Abraham, they still follow and obey the rules. His descendants were thought to look up to him as their head in both religious and secular matters. This patriarchal system of government Abraham endeavored to perpetuate as it tended to preserve the knowledge of God. It was necessary to bind the member of the household together in order to build up a barrier against idolatry that had become so widespread and so deep-seated. So Abraham makes sure that his people is far away from the influence of the world. And that's how he ruled his household. So any final thoughts for letter A? Okay, if not, let's go on to our second question, letter B. What lifestyle was pursued by the patriarchs? Hebrews 11, verse 8 to 10, and Genesis 25, verse 27. Can you please read it, Sister Appy?
So Hebrews says, by faith Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he should
after received for an inheritance, obeyed, and he went out, not knowing whither he went. By faith he sojourned in the land of promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God. And the next one too, or?
Yes. Yes.
Genesis says, and the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter and a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man, dwelling in tents.
Okay, thank you. So what lifestyle was pursued by the patriarchs? From the Bible verse that we have read, they willingly obey what the Lord wants them to do. So even though the patriarchs sometimes doesn't know what the Lord is telling them, they still obey God faithfully. And as we have answered the first question from Abraham, that he has rules, of course, no one could follow it without the example. So he himself shows the true example in his daily life. He became noble. He has a true, faithful, good character that everyone could follow, which revealed that he is connected to heaven. So in his daily life, people could see God in him, and that's the lifestyle that he had, so that everyone could follow it. So any final thoughts for letter B?
It's an interesting question, actually. What lifestyle?
Yes.
It's difficult, actually, based on a few verses to summarize. You have to really read the
Yes.
whole Bible
Yes.
to see more deep. But I can say in conclusion, it's my personal opinion, there was a faithful life.
Yes. It has a peaceful? Faithful, okay. Any more final thoughts for letter B? Yes, Sister Abby.
And just kind of going back to question 1A. So it is a faithful life, like Sister Susanna said. One of the ways that Abraham seemed to accomplish that is what the note says. It was necessary to bind the members of the household together in order to build up a barrier against idolatry. So it's just very important that the families unite, and the enemy knows this. He comes and attacks us many ways, but this is one of the ways he attacks, through families and discord in families, and even in the church family. But living a faithful life, there are many ways, like we have to accomplish this through, so that we can live a faithful life.
Yes, that's true. We need to be united together in order for us to be strong. So any more final thoughts? Yes.
What I take from that is it's not enough to just set the rule.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. It's not enough to just set rules in your household or anywhere. It's very important to set an example and be a good leader.
Yes.
So that's what I took from that.
Thank you. So, because first thing and foremost, people should see the example in yourself before they could follow it. Right. Thank you. So, any more? Okay. Now let's go on to our next subtopic. Okay. It's entitled Education. Hold on. Okay, there. Education in the Wilderness. So letter A question, how did the Lord direct the education of Israel in the wilderness? From 1 Corinthians 10 verse 1 to 4 and Isaiah 63 verse 9. Can you please read it, Brother Daniel?
First Corinthians 10, 1 to 4, it says, moreover, brethren, I would not that ye should be ignorant, how that all our fathers were under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and were baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and did all eat the same spiritual meat, and did all drink the same spiritual drink, for they drank of the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. Also Isaiah,
Yes.
Isaiah 63 verse 9, it says that in all their affliction he was afflicted, and the angel of the presence saved them, and his love and in his pity he redeemed them, and he bare them and carried them all the days of old.
Thank you. So how did the Lord direct the education of Israel in the wilderness? The Lord himself directed the children of Israel. He himself has taught them, retaught them what they have lost of. Because when they are in the land of Egypt, they have lost the knowledge of God because they are influenced by the cultures and the way Egypt is doing. They have idolaters and all other stuffs. So the Lord himself teach the children of Israel. They gave them the manna, the pillar of fire, and the pillar of cloud, which means that he reveals his power to the Israel so that they will remember that he is the only one and true God. And it says here in our note that everything connected with the pitching of the camp was an object lesson to the children, schooling them in habits of precision and carefulness and order. The children that were old enough were required to learn how to pitch the tents in which they lived and to observe perfect order in all that they did. Constantly, they were obtaining an education in regard to heavenly things. Constantly, the parents were explaining to their children why the Israelites were traveling in the wilderness, why the law was given at Sinai, and what they expected to do and to be when they reached the land of promise. Israel needed just the experience that God gave to them, and there was no other power that could deal with them as Christ did through all that long journey in the wilderness. The education of Israel was not entrusted to any human agency. They were taught by one who was infinite wisdom. They were daily learners of what God required his church on earth to be. So, really, the Lord himself is the one who taught the children of Israel. So any final thoughts for our question? Yes, Sister Appy.
What a blessing that the Lord was actually teaching them there. I mean, what an experience to have the Lord be your direct instructor and to have all these beautiful experiences where he blessed you with the manna or he cared for you through a cloud, even when it was so hot, you were always well cared for, or the rain and all these experiences. But even now, I think that the Lord continues to teach us through his nature and through all of the experiences that we can have. We learn what for people, unfortunately, most of us probably don't do this, but people who do till the land, I mean, they learn patience, they learn to cultivate, they learn that they are responsible for these plants and the land. And so we do learn a lot ourselves. We're given that big blessing that if we were to also care, we can learn. We have blessings through the nature.
Yes, I believe in that. So because there's so much thing that we will educate ourselves when we till the soil and plant. That's it. So any more final thoughts? Okay. Now let's go on to our third subtopic. It's entitled God's Plan for Israel. So letter A, what was God's purpose for Israel in the settlement of Canaan? Deuteronomy 4 verse 5 to 10, 11 verse 22 to 24. Can you please read it, sister?
Behold, I have taught you statutes and judgments, even as the Lord my God commanded me, that ye should do so in the land whither ye go to possess it. Keep therefore and do them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the nations, which shall hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. For what nation is there so great, who hath God so nigh unto them, as the Lord our God is in all things that we call upon him for? And what nation is there so great that hath statutes and judgments so righteous as all this law which I set before you this day? Only take heed to thyself, and keep thy soul diligently, lest thou forget the things which thine eyes have seen, and lest they depart from thy heart all the days of thy life, but teach them thy sons and thy sons' sons, The day that thou stoodest before the Lord thy God in Horeb, when the Lord said unto me, Gather me the people together, and I will make them hear my words, that they may learn to fear me all the days that they shall live upon the earth, and that they may teach their children.
Thank you. So what was God's purpose for Israel in the settlement of Canaan? So the Lord has a great plan for Israel. And he fulfilled his promise when in delivering people from the hands of Egypt. And he fulfilled also his promise when the Israelites conquered the Canaan, right? But it is with a condition. If the people of Israel remained true and faithful to God, then he will surely bless them and give them the most powerful nation of their time. And it says here in our note that God chose Israel to reveal his character to men. He desired them to be as wells of salvation in the world. In the early days of Israel, the nations of the world, through corrupt practices, had lost the knowledge of God. They had once known him, but because they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imagination, their foolish heart was darkened. From Romans 1 verse 21. Yet in his mercy, God did not blot them out of existence. He purposed to give them an opportunity of again becoming acquainted with him through his chosen people. Through the teaching of the sacrificial service, Christ was to be uplifted before all nations, and all who would look to him should live. God had placed his people in Canaan as a mighty breastwork to stay the tide of moral evil, that it might not flood the world. So really, the Lord has a wonderful plan for Israel, that they should remain true and faithful to him. And it says here that he placed his people in Canaan as a mighty breastwork to stay the tide of moral evil, that it might not flood the world. So the Lord is trying to lead the people away from the temptations of the world. But then in our letter B question, how did they fare in the implementation of this plan? We all know what happened, that after the Lord had blessed them and keep them, after a long while, they went back to what they have do in Egypt. They have worship the idols again. They intermarry the unbelievers, and it says in Psalms 106 verse 35, they mingled among the heathen and learned their works. So from simple life to again the life of the world, to sinful life. And it says here in our note, the Lord had faithfully fulfilled on his part the promises made to Israel. Joshua had broken the power of Canaanites and had distributed the land to the tribes. It only remained for them, trusting in the assurance of divine aid, to complete the work of dispossessing the inhabitants of the land. But this they failed to do. By entering into the league with Canaanites, they directly transgressed the command of God and thus failed to fulfill the condition on which he had promised to place them in possession of Canaan. Wherever in Israel God's plan of education was carried into effect, its result testifies of its author. But in very many households, the training appointed by heaven and the characters thus developed were alike rare. God's plan was but partially and imperfectly fulfilled by unbelief and by disregard of the Lord's direction. The Israelites surrounded themselves with temptation that few had power to resist. So even though all of these things happened, the Lord just punished them by weakening their powers and not giving to them the greatest nations of all time. And that's the punishment of the Lord. But still, even though this happened, the Lord still stretched out his hands by not destroying the people of Israel. And one more thing that he provided is he provided prophets in order for them to still have the communication to the Lord. And because the prophets are a way of God to communicate with people and to reveal the message of God. And that's what we are going to learn for our next subtopic, which is the School of Prophets. But before we go to our next subtopics, any final thoughts for our, yes, Sister Appy?
And this is in the first note, the last sentence that says, God had placed his people in Canaan as a mighty breastwork to stay the tide of moral evil, that it might not flood the world. That sentence caught my attention because I think that even in his mercy, he wants this world, even if we are sinful and we rebel and the world doesn't acknowledge him, he still wants a world not ridden by sin, because with sin comes so many things that we see now, like wars and just so much suffering and so many negative things, that he wants to care for his people. He wants a happy place. He wants a place full of love. But of course, we don't. We're not obedient. The world doesn't acknowledge him, unfortunately. But I think that in his mercy, this is what he wants, and he wants to continue having the people that are light to everyone else, partially for this reason.
Amen for that. So any more? Yes, Brother Jun?
The true education give through his people. Based in the book of education, the higher aim of our God, the true education means more than a certain course of study. It means more than a preparation for the life that now is.
Yes.
Okay? It has to do with the whole being, not only intellectual.
Yes.
No, that's why it's a part of the student. They have a part in the school of tilling the soil.
Yes.
Okay, it has to do with the whole being, with the whole period of existence possible to man. It is a harmonious development of the physical, the mental, spiritual power. It prepares the student for the joy of service in this world, and for the higher joy of wider service in our world today. So my question, another question: why do we need this through education? So we learn, about when the sin enter. This gift of God to Eden was prohibited. So what happened to the four aspects of man? If you read in Genesis 6:5, the mind of the people always evil. If you read Matthew 9:35, the sickness scattered in that place. That's why the person missed a work of Christ to healing them.
Yes.
And what happened to spiritual? The people are no longer have a higher spiritual condition because of the love of the world. You can read that in 2 Timothy 3:4. Love is of pleasure than God. Even in our time, even we are professing we are a Christian, sometimes we don't have to read our Bible. We're more interested in secular, in around is the TV or the movie, and our relation to our neighbor. Like you can read that in Matthew 24:12, what we call the relation of our neighbor is going to very weak. So what is the purpose of probation? Can I read one stances here? Why did God give the probation? The same book in the education. The purpose of the probation to bring back the image of God, the physical, the mental, and spiritual was lost in Eden, and God give us an example. You can read that in Luke 2:52. Christ grow in fear, grow in the stature,
Physical stature,
physical, and spiritual, mental, and fear. So God give us an example, not only intellectual, but of course the physical health.
Yes.
Because erroneous eating will affect our character, spiritual aspect.
Amen. Thank you, Brother June. And one thing more, why the Lord really wants us to learn about the true education, because the education that we will receive from God will give us the life in the life to come. It will prepare us to the life for the life to come. So, any more final thoughts? Okay, now let's go on to our fourth subtopic. It's entitled Schools of the Prophets. So here we will learn that there is a school for prophets before. So letter A, from references to the existence of the schools of the prophets, what can we learn about their nature and operation? So by this question, we will learn how is that school is being operated by. So 1 Samuel 19 verse 18 to 20 and 2 Kings 6 verse 1 to 7. Can you please read it, Sister Susanna?
So is it first?
Yeah. 1 Samuel 19 verse 18 to 20.
So David fled and escaped and came to Samuel to Ramah and told him all that Saul had done to him. And he and Samuel went and dwelt in Naioth. And it was told Saul that, behold, David is at Naioth in Ramah. And Saul sent messengers to take David, and when they saw the company of the prophets prophesying and Samuel standing as appointed over them, the Spirit of God was upon the messengers of Saul, and they also prophesied.
Okay. Thank you. So from the reference of the existence of the schools of the prophets, what can we learn about their nature and operation? So as we read the Bible verse, it says here that David went to Ramah because Ramah is the first school of the prophet, and the second one is from Kirjath Jearim, where the ark then was, and that's the second school of the prophet. And what can we learn about the nature and operation? So the school of prophet was made for those young people who are seeking wisdom from above, to know more about God's word, and who has the desire of teaching it too. So if we will read our note, it says here the schools of the prophets. It says there that the schools of the prophets were founded by Samuel to serve as a barrier against the widespread corruption, to provide for the moral and spiritual welfare of the youth, and to promote the future prosperity of the nation by furnishing it with men qualified to act in the fear of God as leaders and counselors. In the accomplishment of this object, Samuel gathered companies of young men who were pious, intelligent, and studious. So before you enter the school of prophets, Samuel is really screening the students if they are really qualified enough, if they are pious, meaning they are religious, they are intelligent and studious, meaning they really have the desire to know more of God. And as we go along, it says here, as they communed with God and studied his word and his works, wisdom from above was added to their natural endowments. The instructors were men not only well versed in divine truth, but those who had themselves enjoyed communion with God and had received the special endowment of his Spirit. So not only that they have learned a lot of things, but they received the knowledge by the Spirit, by the Holy Spirit. They are endowed. They enjoyed and respect and confidence of the people, both for learning and piety. The chief subject of study were the law of God, with the instruction given to Moses, sacred history, sacred music and poetry. Okay. It was the grand object of all study to learn the will of God and the duties of his people. In the records of sacred history were traced the footsteps of Jehovah. From the events of the past were drawn lesson of instruction for the future. The great truths set forth by the types and shadows of the Mosaic law were brought to view. And faith grasped the center object of all the system, the Lamb of God that was to take away the sins of the world. So this school is different from the theological school that we have right now, because the main aim of this school is to restore back the image of the Lord. They are taught how to pray, how to communicate with the Creator, how to be more faithful, and how to do and perform the will of the Lord. And also, they are taught how to sing well, to sing by their hearts. And that's how they are taught in the school of prophets. And any final thoughts? Anyone who could share about the nature and operation of the school of prophets? Okay. If not, let's go on to letter B. What manual training did Jesus receive when he was on this earth? We all know that Jesus, when he is here on earth, he was a carpenter, right? So that's the manual training of Jesus Christ. And what about the students of the schools of the prophets? As we have read the 2 Kings 6 verse 1 to 7, that Elisha makes an axe head float at Jordan River. So that means that they are doing also manual labor. And it says here, the pupils, oh yes, Brother Daniel.
All of them were to learn some kind of skills. Yes. All of them. Like in the case of Christ, he was a carpenter. But in the school of the prophets, it was different skills, not necessarily what they were doing there, but all of them, even today, in our missionary schools, yes, they have to learn skills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's very important, because from our note it says that the pupils of this school sustained themselves by their own labor as husbandmen and mechanics. In Israel, this was not considered strange or degrading, because right now, if you were like tillers of the soil, that's like degrading for some other people. And it says here, it was regarded a crime to allow children to grow up in ignorance of useful labor. So, as in our time, this is not a crime anymore. But, you know, it's really very important to teach our children to do manual labor and to be ready in times of emergency, right? And as I continue to read, in obedience to the command of God, every child was taught some trade, even though he was to be educated for holy office. So everything is balanced. Physical and mental and spiritual well-being is well-balanced, trained in the school of prophets. So any more final thoughts for our fourth subtopic, school of prophets? Okay, if not, let's go on to our last subtopic. It's entitled Noble Examples. Letter A question, how did God reward Joseph's integrity and faith after he had suffered great adversity? Genesis 37 verse 28 and Genesis 41 verse 41 to 44. Can you please read it, Sister Abby?
Then there passed by Midianites merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit, and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph into Egypt. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, See, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand, and put it upon Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. And he made him to ride in the second chariot which he had. And they cried before him, Bow the knee, and he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt.
Okay, so how did God reward Joseph's integrity and faith after he had suffered great adversity? So we all know the story of Joseph's faithfulness. Even though his brothers sold him for like 20 pieces of silver, he still chose to be faithful and remained true and loyal to the Lord. He sees the bigger picture in life. Instead of looking at the bad side of life, he brought that into a good one. And the great adversary that happened to him prepares him for the future. For every day he clings to the Lord, his faith grew stronger as he prays to the Lord for courage and strength. And not along while what happened, the Pharaoh recognized him and commends him, and the Pharaoh himself acknowledged that Joseph God is the one and only true God. So any more final thoughts for letter A? Our next noble example is Daniel. So describe Daniel's background. How does Daniel's life reveal the benefit of godly education? Daniel 1 verse 1 to 6 and Daniel 6 verse 1 to 3. Yes.
Um, 1 to 6. In the third year of reign of Joachim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar,
Nasar.
king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Joachim, king of Judah, into his hand with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God, and they brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. And the king spake unto Ephanazar, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel and of the king's seed and of the princess, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored and skillful in all wisdom and cunning in knowledge and understanding science, and such as had ability into them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach and learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed them a daily provisions of the king's meat and the wine, which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Now among these were of the children of Judah Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah.
Thank you. Thank you, Sister Sana. So, describe Daniel's background and how does Daniel's life reveal the benefit of godly education? So we all know that Daniel has the great wisdom and knowledge above everyone else, and he remained true and faithful to the Lord. And as we can read in the Bible, it says they could find none occasion nor fault, for as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. So that means that Daniel is really one true noble example that we need to follow. And from what also Joseph and Daniel did, they fulfilled the purpose of God. And they illustrate the goodness and beneficence of God and illustrate the love of Christ. Their influence, their wisdom, and their faithfulness was honored by the whole nation. And through that, the people see the one and only true God. And that's what we need to learn from these noble examples, that these are written as and samples for us to have, for us to follow what they have done. And it says here that God's work in all time is the same. The teacher is the same. God's character and his plan are the same. With him is no variableness, neither shadow of turning. From James 1 verse 7. So one thing we will learn from all of this is that they adhere to the principle of the Lord, and the Lord blessed them. So may we all also adhere to the principle of God, so that the Lord will also bless us. So this is the whole week lesson study. Thank you.